Why did he even bother to write? Was it its mother egging him, or Josephine? Was the motivation from within or from without? Was it driven by altruism, or was it pure ego? In this essay, Why I Write, George Orwell names 4 motives for writing. 1, he says sheer egoism. He says all writers are egoists. There's a desire in all of us to desire to seem clever, to be talked about, to be remembered after death. 2, aesthetic enthusiasm, or the perception of beauty in the external world, or in words and in their right arrangement. 3, writers write for historical impulse, or the desire to see things as they are. And finally, he says, for a political purpose. And here I quote Orwell's own description of his own motivation. He says, "What I have most wanted to do is to make political writing into an art. My starting point is always a feeling of partisanship, a sense of injustice. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I'm going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact which I want to draw attention, and my initial concern is to get a hearing. But I could not do the work of writing if it were not also an excellent aesthetic experience. Anyone who cares to examine my work will see that even when it is downright propaganda, it contains much more than a full-time politician would consider irrelevant. The job is to reconcile my ingrained likes and dislikes with the essentially public, non-individual activities that this age forces on all of us." End of quote. Friends, today we gather to celebrate National Children's Book Day. It's an excellent day and perfect timing. We wish to acknowledge the presence of our national artist for literature, Mr. Virgilio Almar. Compulsive bibliophiles and impassioned pedagogues are welcome today. Artists, illustrators, writers, anyone who sincerely love and respect children must share in our jubilation. During the early years of the K-12 reform, when we were just rolling out the MTB-MLE program, like a woman in labor, gasping and panting, we were confronted with the huge problem of the lack of original stories in the mother tongue that could be used for the primary grades. What we had were translations of the usual publications, those that you read in your childhood, in English and Filipino. But while these were old-time favorites and were great stories and in fact classics in their own right, they did not speak the language, the culture, and traditions that were familiar with first-time readers. We found a solution by appealing to our public school teachers to write and gather oral traditions, document original stories from the local communities. When I went around the schools, our primary schools, a year or two later, I found much joy and pride in the teachers' presentation of original stories from the localities in a big book version, authored and illustrated, not by well-trained writers and illustrators, but big books nevertheless used in the classroom by our own teachers. By now, I have lost count. There must be hundreds of original stories out there in the field, used in the classrooms, obviously requiring some additional intervention but definitely ready to be harvested into an anthology of original Filipino stories in the mother tongue. Great work for PBBY and in collaboration with CCP on their 50th year. We encountered the same problem when DepEd shifted to local history as the starting point for Araling Panlipunan. Instead of teaching about the Philippines and Rizal and other national heroes, we thought it was better to always talk about those who are closer home. Since most barangays or municipalities do not have adequate publications on their local histories, it was close to impossible to get any essays or resources on local heroes and community chronicles. Our DepEd teachers again came to the rescue and did their own share in compiling articles, interviewing old people, taking pictures and sources so students could begin to know the Philippines and the world with their hometown as anchor for their historical journey. Would anyone have the discipline and the patriotism to gather those materials and work with our teachers and the local communities to further develop the collection into a serious publication? Another assignment for PBBY and CCP. Dear friends, in our celebration today, we especially welcome our esteemed writers and chroniclers, essayists and poets, artists, novelists, biographers. We're rolling out the red carpet to those who are gifted, nay, compelled to write, because they have a story to tell. You have a story to tell, or a lie to expose, or history to be recorded, or beauty to be captured. Do not worry if egoism gets in the way. That will sort itself out pretty soon. But write as though it were your lifeblood. Write as though this nation's very existence lies on the tip of your quill. This nation is in search of its soul, and you cannot allow money or politics or armaments to continue to dangle their empty promises or to resurrect the ghosts of yesteryears. In the words of Carlos P. Romulo, the might of your pen may yet bring every Filipino to discover that, and I quote one that my teacher made me memorize in grade 4, the seed I bear within me is an immortal seed. It is the insignia of my race, and my generation is but a stage in the unending search of my people for freedom and happiness. End of quote. I must warn you though, if you wish to take your mission seriously, have courage. Pepe and many others during his time and before his time were martyred because they dared to write. In another era and cultural milieu, the same fate befell an eminent scholar and a genius of translation, William Tyndale, who translated the Bible directly from Hebrew and Greek into English, almost single-handedly. Referring to the English language while comparing him to William Shakespeare, Hannah Bowers writes, and I quote, Tyndale was burned alive in a small town in Belgium in 1536. His crime was to have translated the Bible into English. He was effectively martyred after fighting against cruel and eventually overwhelming forces, which tried for more than a dozen years to prevent him from putting the Word of God into his native language. More than any other man, he laid the foundation of our modern language, which became by degrees a world language. His legacy matches that other pillar of our language, Shakespeare, whose genius was in imagination. End of quote. From an era when books were unavailable, the first printing press has revolutionized the landscape and made books available to ordinary people, but maybe not in the Philippines yet. And I think that's really the next stage and the biggest challenge for all of us. to make books available to ordinary citizens, especially to primary grade students. Fast forward to the 21st century, we find that access to digitized resources has become a game changer in our world. In fact, by 2017, there were already 4.2 billion internet users. A lot of them are in the Philippines. 54.4% of the world's population. It was the same year when Thomas Friedman, writing in the New York Times, took note of a critical moment of history that, he says, now is irreversible. And I quote, "And so it came to pass that in the winter of 2016, the world hit a tipping point when we realized that a critical mass of our lives and work had shifted away from the terrestrial world to a realm known as cyberspace. That is to say, a critical mass of our interactions had moved to a realm where we're all connected, but no one is in charge. After all, there are no stoplights in cyberspace, no police officers walking the beat, no courts, no judges, no God who smites evil and rewards good." End of quote. That seems to be like a mirror image of what is happening in the country today, where news, or rather fake news, are written by trolls and boosts and bots who rule in this era where populism is deified, where history is revised, and where surveys and polls and votes of the majority stir the pot of violence and division. As the movers and shakers add chaos to the confusion, the thinkers and visionaries are nowhere to be found. I long to hear the voice of our poets and artists and writers, those who nurture the soul of our nation, where our nation's soul resides. Well, the truth is that the gains of the third industrial revolution, at least for me, has become a real affliction. For there are moments when I truly long to go on self-imposed exile into an island with no Wi-Fi connection, and where I can get my downtime from Viber and Instagram and WhatsApp. I was going to add email, but somebody said that's already Jurassic. And in that island with no Wi-Fi, I can watch sunsets and smell flowers, sip Barako coffee or San Miguel beer at night, and simply turn the pages of a good read under the shades of a narrow tree. Yan na siguro ang bunga ng aking pangangarap ng gising para sa isang mundong payapa para sa kabataang malaya. If we were to give every Filipino child that downtime to seek that which only the heart can see rightly, by offering them stories that can only come from our forebears and can only be told and retold and written and illustrated by Filipinos, then we would certainly have the joy of creating a nation for our children, which the other Pepe, surnamed Jokno, dreamed of. And I quote, "A noble nation where homage is paid not to who a person is or what the person owns, but to what the person is and what the person does. A proud nation where poverty chains no man to the plow, forces no woman to prostitute herself, and condemns no child to scrounge around among garbage. A free nation where men and women and children from all regions, with all kinds of talents, may find truth and play and sing and laugh and dance and love without fear. A just nation where poverty, ignorance, and hunger are attacked. Every breadwinner a job, every farmer a land, every family a home, and everyone a steadily improving quality of life. An independent nation which rejects foreign dictation depends on itself, thinks for itself, and decides for itself. An honorable nation where public powers are used for the public good, where leaders speak not only well, but truthfully and act honestly. A nation that is itself and seeks to live in peace and brotherhood with all other nations of the world. Dear friends, esteemed guests, on this 36th National Children's Book Day, with the might of our pens and the courage in our hearts, let us proclaim this truth and claim it as our own. Magandang umaga po sa inyo.